During World War II, the air war in the Pacific saw some of the most ferocious fighting ever. Ships were necessary to cover the vast oceanic expanses, and ships became the most frequently attacked targets. The seeds for the war in the Pacific were sown with the Japanese militarist expansion onto the Chinese mainland during the late 1930s. Like Germany's Legion Condor during the Spanish Civil War, the Japanese too gained much experience in the use of air power as a weapon of terror. It was acknowledged that such territorial expansion in the Pacific would inevitably provoke war with the United States, whose own forces in the region were largely unprepared to meet this challenge. To have any chance of defeating the industrial might of America, it was essential for Japan to strike sooner rather than later. Even as Japanese and American diplomats met in Washington in attempts to avert war, a large Japanese naval task force comprising 6 attack carriers set course for the U.S. Navy base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. On the morning of December 7, 1941, nearly 300 Japanese naval aircraft were launched in 2 waves. Around 2/3 of this force comprised VAL dive bombers and Kate torpedo bombers. Zeros provided fighter escort. The attack achieved total surprise. Nearly 200 American aircraft were destroyed in the air and on the ground. Expecting to find the U.S. Navy's carriers, which were fortuitously out at sea, the Japanese pilots instead attacked the battleships, neatly moored off Ford Island. Five were sunk or badly damaged. Numerous other naval vessels were also destroyed. Total cost to the Japanese was just 29 aircraft. By the time the last of these had been recovered aboard their carriers in the early afternoon, the United States was finally at war. Matching the speed and ferocity of the German blitzkrieg in Europe, it continued across the near Pacific. As Singapore fell, Japan attacked the Dutch East Indies. Spearheaded by a paratroop assault, a total of 100,000 troops landed on the islands of Sumatra and Java, and once again quickly overwhelmed Allied opposition. In a matter of months, the Allies had lost virtually every island between continental Asia and Australia to the Japanese. The cost in men and materiel had been prodigious. The Japanese strategic plan in the Pacific was to establish an outer defense perimeter, the key to which was the American base at Midway. They believed that any battle to defeat the U.S. Pacific Fleet must be fought and won in 1942 before the vast American naval building program bore fruit. American naval forces were far outnumbered. For the assault on Midway, the Japanese naval commander-in-chief, Admiral Yamamoto, assembled a massive naval force which included 8 carriers, 11 battleships, and 100 other naval vessels. Early American attacks by land bombers based on Midway had inflicted little damage. But to prevent further raids, the Japanese mounted a series of strikes intent on knocking out the airstrip and its gun emplacements. Early on June 4th, the Japanese fleet was spotted and American strikes were launched. An initial strike by 2 Devastator squadrons was completely annihilated. A later attack by dauntless dive bombers fared better, hitting and heavily damaging 3 heavy Japanese carriers, Shoryu, Kaga, and Akagi. Both sides attacked and counterattacked. Each lost a carrier. The Americans Yorktown and the Japanese Hiryu. One of history's decisive battles, Midway marked the turning point of the war in the Pacific and confirmed the carrier as the major capital ship. Japan lost 4 heavy carriers and thus her naval domination of the Pacific. Without such opposition, the American fleet could at last begin to check the relentless Japanese advance. Midway gave the Americans the chance of seizing the initiative, if only for a short time before the Japanese reorganized their fleets. In August of 1942, a U.S. naval task force, including 3 carriers, landed 19,000 Marines on the island of Guadalcanal in the Solomons Chain. Backed up by land-based aircraft, the Japanese dispatched a carrier-escorted invasion force to recapture Guadalcanal. Despite constant air and ground attack and naval bombardment, the Marines succeeded in building an airstrip on the island. Within a week, Henderson Field was open for flight operations. During fighting between the carriers in the eastern Solomons, Enterprise was severely damaged but remained in action. The Japanese lost a light carrier, Ryojo. One further major engagement was fought, the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands, in late October. Here, USS Enterprise was damaged again, and Hornet was sunk. On the face of it, American carrier losses exceeded those of the Japanese. But since the American aim was to keep the Imperial Japanese fleet from interfering with the Guadalcanal landings, a task in which they succeeded, the battles for the Solomon Islands must be regarded as a strategic victory for the Americans. The island chains of the Gilberts, Marshalls, Carolines, and Marianas in the mid-Pacific formed the next stage of the war in the Pacific. Operations to recapture them formed a set pattern known as the Island Hopping Campaign. As each island was taken, their airfields provided the key bases from which further island-hopping operations could be covered. Having softened up the Japanese defenses with air and naval bombardment, the U.S. troops went ashore. Carrier air power also provided close air support during the actual assault itself. Ground fighting to recapture these islands was a hard and bloody business. The fanatical, well-dug-in Japanese troops defended with great tenacity. Losses on both sides were huge. Once an island had been taken and secured, the Marine Construction Brigade swung into operation. Known as the Seabees after their initials, their task was to construct an airfield as quickly as possible so that further operations could continue. From these airfields, Army Air Corps medium and heavy bombers harassed Japanese shipping and airfields. Reduction of the Japanese garrisons in these large archipelagos, successfully accomplished between November 1943 and February 1944, was followed by a temporary withdrawal of the American carrier forces to regroup for the next phase, the Great Thrust into the Southwest Pacific. Pilots of land-based aircraft had the security of a long airfield. For pilots of carrier-based aircraft, the task was never as easy, and accidents also took their toll on losses. Following earlier heavy losses, both sides have been working hard to re-equip their carrier fleets. Despite the introduction of new naval aircraft, what the Imperial Navy really lacked was experienced flyers, and their replacements would now be pitted against vastly improved U.S. aircraft, notably the Hellcat and Corsair. U.S. actions opened in June of 1944 when carriers launched strikes against Saipan and Tinian. 200 Hellcats destroyed 40 Japanese aircraft on the ground. Supported by massive naval bombardment and U.S. carrier aircraft, 20,000 Marines went ashore on Saipan on 15 June 1944. With the buildup of powerful naval forces now by both sides, the stage was being set for the greatest ever clash between carriers, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Pitted against the 9 Japanese carriers were 15 carriers of the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet. The Japanese Mobile Fleet was well set for the engagement when the first contacts were made. but it would be completely unprepared for the scale of the defeat which was to follow. Soon after, opposing search aircraft detected both fleets. Each launched a series of powerful carrier airstrikes. The Japanese struck repeatedly with a total of 4 strikes. But warned of their approach by radar, U.S. Hellcat and Corsair fighters were waiting for them and shot down no less than 216 of the attackers. Now it was the turn of the Americans to launch their strikes. Over 210 aircraft, split into 6 groups, struck the Japanese fleet. When the battle was over, the scale of the defeat was clear. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, it was disaster. Along with the loss of nearly 350 aircraft, 3 carriers had been sunk. No American carrier had even been hit. It is not surprising that this one-sided encounter became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. American forces went on to complete the capture of Saipan by mid-August 1944, providing thereby an important base for subsequent bomber attacks on Japan itself. Capture of Guam and Tinian at the same time marked the end of the American campaign in the Central Pacific. Following his retreat from the Philippines, General MacArthur had vowed that he would return. The first step in the offensive to recapture the Philippines began with the assault on Leyte. By the beginning of December of 1944, 7 U.S. divisions were fighting on the island. To prevent Japanese air power from interfering with the American operations on Leyte, preemptive airstrikes were also carried out against aircraft based in Formosa. American warships now had to contend with a new weapon. From Kyushu, southernmost island of the Japanese mainland, the first kamikaze, or suicide bombers, were launched. According to the samurai code of Bushido, no honor was considered greater than to sacrifice your life in defense of the homeland. The final clash between U.S. and Japanese carrier naval forces took place at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in late October of 1944. Here, the Imperial Japanese Navy was decisively defeated, losing 4 carriers and 3 battleships, compared to American losses of 3 carriers and 2 destroyers. The battle marked the demise of the Japanese Navy as a powerful and balanced fighting force. With her naval power virtually eliminated, the final outcome of the war was never in any doubt. By March 1945, American forces were approaching the Japanese home islands. The next step was an invasion of the island of Okinawa. This involved a massive assault and support force, second only in size to the D-Day landings in Europe. Okinawa was perhaps the greatest naval and air campaign ever fought. U.S. Navy warships supporting the landings came under intense air attack as they were hit by no fewer than 4,500 Japanese aircraft in suicide and conventional attacks. By the end of the battle in July of 1945, nearly 2,500 were claimed destroyed. America had lost 33 ships sunk and 120 severely damaged. The final phase of the Pacific War came with the strategic bombing campaign against Japan. B-29s of the U.S. Army Air Force literally burned and blasted the heart out of Japan. The cost in dollars was prodigious. Yet without the big bombers, the cost on lives on both sides in an invasion of the Japanese homeland would have been even more horrifying. The capture of the Marianas, coupled with a vast engineering effort, had made possible construction of 5 great air bases, each capable of handling 180 super fortresses. From Guam, Tinian, and Saipan, B-29s began to attack Japan in June of 1944.
Some 1,500 miles from this island.
Daylight attacks against strategic targets, such as Japanese military and industrial centers, were followed by massive night incendiary bombing raids against major cities, beginning in March of 1945. Hundreds of square kilometers were reduced to ashes. In these great fire raids, well over 500,000 Japanese civilians were killed, and 13 million others rendered homeless. In spite of the enormous casualties sustained during the fire raids, it fell to the delivery of a new and terrible weapon, the atomic bomb, to convince the Japanese of the futility of continuing the war. 2 atomic weapons dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945 brought about the end of the war in the Pacific, and thus the end of World War II, the most destructive conflict ever seen in the history of mankind. Presiding at the surrender ceremony held aboard the battleship Missouri was Supreme Allied Commander in the Pacific, General Douglas MacArthur. He said, "It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge from the blood and the carnage of the past."